Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Parannoul record, After the Magic. After finding minimal success for several years releasing projects on the underbelly of the indie circuit under the name Last Star, a certain South Korean shoegaze musician picked up the name Parannoul in 2020 and debuted with the studio album Let's Walk on the Path of a Blue Cat, a record that didn't really get a lot of attention, but for those who heard it, they found a lot to enjoy in it, even if it was an ultimate indie release, an album that not a lot of people heard, and it didn't seem like Parannoul was going to be the kind of record that a lot of people heard in general, until the aforementioned record was followed up with 2021's To See the Next Part of the Dream, an album that blew a lot of critics away, with publications ranging from Pitchfork to even user-based sites like Rate Your Music praising it up and down as one of the greatest records of the year and one of the best albums in recent memory in general, and honestly, I can't say that they were totally wrong. That was a stunning album. But the thing is, To See the Next Part of the Dream was an album that struck a deep emotional chord with a lot of listeners, such as myself. Obviously, that in and of itself isn't a problem or anything, but what does end up being a problem is the fact that when you create something so emotionally striking, it's difficult to follow it up with anything that's even half as decent. So despite the fact that in recent memory, Parannoul has done some excellent collaborations with talented artists like Asian Glow, it just didn't seem like he was actually going to manage to pull off a proper, excellent follow-up to See the Next Part of the Dream, but here we are, and despite the fact that the odds seem stacked against him, he manages to pull it off with After the Magic, an album that may somehow manage to actually surpass its predecessor in almost every way. After the Magic perhaps succeeds the most due to the fact that it manages to strike this fantastic balance between everything that has made Parannoul's music great in the past, as well as new things that he introduces to his sound to really push himself forward artistically as to not repeat himself totally. After the Magic is just as emotion-centric as anything else in Parannoul's discography so far. For those who have heard records like To See the Next Part of the Dream, they know just how deep and amazing and frankly kind of beautiful a lot of atmospheres can be throughout Parannoul's music. He really does know how to create a soundscape and use it towards his benefit, as it really does suck in the listener 9 times out of 10, and that just does not change on After the Magic, as the accomplishment that I've just mentioned in the realm of lush, oftentimes dreamlike worlds is just as present here on After the Magic as anything else he's ever done. With that being said, on After the Magic, Parannoul has never sounded as grand yet sincere. There's a level of bombastic size and largeness about this entire record, but at the same time, it never feels cheap or over the top or anything like that. Really, ultimately, After the Magic knows how important it sounds. It feels like this Goliath of shoegaze-influenced indie rock music, that's for sure, but it could just kind of trail off into nothingness, but it chooses not to, because it recognizes what it is and manipulates that to its advantage, and ends up becoming one of the more emotional albums I've heard in a good while. An argument could be made that After the Magic is a relatively cinematic record overall, but it never feels explosive or anything like that, and that's because it doesn't need to be, and Parannoul knows that, and that's why ultimately the product that we are left with is just a really stunning and oftentimes engrossing listening experience. The sound quality here is also absolutely amazing to an almost surreal extent, as Parannoul and his collaborators utilize After the Magic as a means to show off their production-related abilities and to endow the album itself with this ethereal soundscape. With that being said, I kind of have to say that this album cover is pretty accurate towards how the album itself sounds. Cold and somewhat isolated, yet incredibly inviting all of the same, to the point that it almost becomes kind of warm and sort of accepting of the listener. The way that the individual tracks here gradually build up before they crescendo into these walls of beautiful noise that end up sweeping up the listener and everything else in their path is something that can range from very pleasant to genuinely stunning at times, and ultimately every single second of After the Magic is one of two things: necessary and aesthetically pleasing, or genuinely gorgeous. If you ever wanted to call an album enchanting, and that's a pretty strong word that I don't personally like to use a lot, if you really, really wanted to call an album enchanting, or staggering, or something to that extent, it would only be valid if it had something to do with an album sounding like what is found on After the Magic and the brilliance that Parannoul delivers here. Although After the Magic really is just a lovely record more often than not, it isn't too uncommon for Parannoul to do exactly that at this point in his career. His discography is built on sounds that are very lush, very pleasant to listen to, and can be experienced in a very direct one-on-one or in a more distant, kind of put on in the background sort of manner. But that doesn't mean that he just lets that be and lets that be the album. That's not all that's being found here. This entire experience of After the Magic is also a tool for Parannoul to really push himself as a musician as he picks up a variety of new influences. After the Magic really manages to weave together a lot of different sounds quite beautifully overall, and although it is still based around shoegaze just like prior Parannoul releases, this album is just as rooted in chamber music as it is indie rock, as it is electronic, as it is shoegaze. There are a number of different things going on here coming together to make one of the most important sounding albums of the year so far, and something that I'm sure will end up on one of my favorite album of the year lists at the end of the year. Parannoul has always been on people's radar for a couple of years at this point. I mean, really, he's just been consistently someone that people have been looking out for, but only a couple of years. He's only been on people's radar for a couple of years, yet he has all of the confidence and creative vision as someone that has decades of experience. And perhaps calling him a prodigy would be inappropriate, or maybe even a little insulting, considering some of his earliest work under different project names comes from well over half a decade ago at this point. But really, I feel like his work as Parannoul really kind of radiates this sort of youthful energy that has just as much freshness and almost movement-defining vibe as it does a lot of sounds that kind of sound like they come from someone that knows what they're doing much more than any artist that's only been around for a few years should. Parannoul's work sounds new, but it sounds old, and there's a degree of artistic wisdom here that really a lot of younger artists don't have the right to have, not because they shouldn't have it, but because it just doesn't seem like it's likely for them to have it. But here he is, making one of the most beautiful albums I've heard in months. I'm going to give this record 4.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.